Hello everybody and welcome back. Here we are in Loon and we're going to go to this border here because Ben has told us in his youth this is where you go to find fame and fortune. There's a few things to clear up for continuity purposes from last time. First, we rode away from the Black Eagle Barony on a lot of horses. We have sort of donated those horses to the cause against the Iron Ring. We did trade them all for a pony because at the end of last time I totted up all the treasure we had and we're carrying a lot of gold. At some point the encumbrance rules will kick in and we will have to find a way of transporting that. A pony is more sensible than a horse. It's cheaper, easier to keep, and it's a lot smaller. We've added a pony to our retinue here and we cross through this territory. Probably some minor skirmishes on the way, maybe the odd goblin, but nothing to write home about. The other thing, at the end of the Eye of Traldar, we were given as a reward that Staff of Healing, which Leriath gave to us. That's probably one of the best treasures we got from the whole adventure. This is the keep on the Borderlands. It was published in 1981. This is a reprint from Drive-Thru RPG. It cost me $9.99. I don't know what the original price was, but I'm sure it is much cheaper today than it was back then, even though this is a one-off and not even part of a production run. This is B2. It's a very early adventure, and it also has a lot of tutorial tips for dungeon masters to begin with. What you notice when you open it up is just how absolutely dense the text is. I'm sure this is due to printing costs. Printing has had a revolution over the past decades. It's much more economical today to give lots of space to text, whereas back then paper and printing were a premium. Inside you get a couple of maps. You get a map of the land. The keep is here. I have redrawn that like this so I can write on this. I worked out the scale and each square is 100 yards. It's 40 squares by 54, so it's 4,000 by 5,400 yards. That's about 2.3 miles by 3 miles, or 3.6 kilometers by 5 kilometers. The average walking speed is 2.5 miles an hour. You could feasibly walk from there to there in 1 hour. However, we are not going for a leisurely stroll. We are meant to be creeping through this at 100 yards every 10 minutes. Presumably we're checking for monsters that leap out at us from the forests, or creatures in the swamp that will rise up and drag us under. The other map you get is of the Bailey, or the keep itself, and it's got two areas. This area here is closed off to you. This is a gatehouse, and you're told when you come in through here that the gatehouse is only open to people who have official business with the rulers of the keep, and that won't be us. All these other buildings are well described within the book. There's an awful lot of detail given on who lives where, what treasure they have, what their character class is, their weapons, their skills. And if you were playing an evil party, you could have a good time robbing this place, but the consequences are quite stiff. It even gives you all the details of the battlements and the weaponry. And indeed, if you were high level enough and so inclined, you could probably revisit this place at maybe level 15 and using siege weapons take it over. Despite all the details given, it has been remarked that none of the characters have any names or any descriptions. So for example, the barman, we're not told whether he is fat and jolly or thin and miserable, and we don't know his name. Everything is open to the dungeon master to fill in. There are some tables here. These tables were duplicated in the red box set, so they're just additional. The main part of the quest is a massive dungeon crawl called the Caves of Chaos. Because the text is so tense, all of that is covered in just 8 to 9 pages, and you have to read it all very closely. Well, what are we getting ourselves into? The keep on the Borderlands is very different from the Eye of Traldar. The Eye of Traldar had a plot, and that plot happened immediately. We didn't even have time to finish our flambéed pizza before we were ambushed. This, however, has no plot. It's the second module, and it came very early on in the D&D timeline, and the plot is essentially the romance of the D&D concept, the idea that you're just driven to seek the adventure. For this to work then, you really have to embed yourself into the environment and roleplay that life. I think that's enough to be getting on with. We have come up from here. This river looks impassable, so I'm assuming the path goes around here and up, and you enter the keep from the east here, and we're clip-clopping along with the pony behind us, and we come in through here, and immediately we're hit with a corporal who's on guard and a scribe who wants to take all our details. We're quite happy to do this. Ben looks around and says, you know, nothing here has changed. And sure enough, it is of course the same module today as it was in 1981. But from his point of view, this brings back a lot of memories. And we're told to put our pony into the stables. That's the first building we come to. And that will cost us about 10 gold pieces a week to stable it. And we will be here for several weeks. We are not going anywhere for some time. We put the pony into the stables, and then we're suddenly weighed down with all these saddlebags of our own gold. The corporal says to us, if you've got a bit too much money there, you'd better deposit it in the bank. And that is our next port of call, which is this building here. And you can actually put your money into the bank, and it keeps it safe for you and charges you a small nominal fee. So that is where we go to next. We pass the smithy, warehouses, private homes, a couple of general stores, until we get to what is Fountain Square. And Ben tells us we better book into the inn. It's not that big. The inn has 2 types of accommodations. It has a communal room for about 20 people. We've got more gold than that. We can afford the private rooms. It only has 5 private rooms, and there's 5 of us. And luckily, by coincidence, they're all available. So we rent those rooms. We can book them at least for 1 week, and we'll probably need them for more, but we've got the option to let the landlady know. And then Ben says, right, the first thing you have to do when you get to this place, before you go outside and look for any adventure, is go to the tavern. Come on, let's go for a drink. First round on me. Donard and Sylvia say thank you, whereas Liz and Malin, well, they've seen Ben drunk before, and it's not a pleasant sight. So we go into the tavern, and it looks like this. Ben leads the way, and he opens up the doors of the tavern, and that smell of stale beer and stale adventure just comes wafting out. And they say there's nothing more evocative for memory than smell, and sure enough, Ben is taken back in time a great many years. He rubs his hands and says to everybody, name your poison, my round. Donard says he'll have a beer, Sylvia will choose a wine, Liz will have mead, and Malin will have a beer. Ben and Donard, they go to the bar. Malin loiters there, and Sylvia and Liz look around. Ben orders his beers, and he says to the barman, is Catty working tonight? And the barman says, who? Ben said, you know, Catty, big red hair, and he puts his hands up to his chest. Big, you know. And the barman blushes and bursts out laughing and says, oh, you mean my mother? She hasn't gone by the name of Catty for some time. She's Mrs. Rainwhite these days. The barman says, if you want, she's upstairs with my kids. I can call her. Ben kind of stutters and says, no, just get the drinks. Donard says to Ben, alright, so you had a bit of a thing going with Granny Wainwright then? Ben sort of is flustered, he feels a bit dizzy, and he clutches his head and says, For how many years have I been drunk? Donard says, dunno, but clearly long enough for everyone else to move on with their life. Ben reflects back to all those days he spent sitting in his chair, staring at the fire, while the dust in the house gathered. Yep, and if you don't really do anything with your life, then 1 month passes like a day. Anyway, the drinks come, he gives his beer to Malin, and he sort of says to Malin, go on, shoo, scram vamoose, mix with the locals, get some news, we have to know what's going on around here. So Malin takes his beer, and he kind of wanders off to meet the locals. He's the youngest in the bar, and he feels a bit out of place, and he notices a table here of 4 other young people, so he just walks over, beer in hand, other hand in his pocket, and he just kind of loiters. These 4 guys look like they're having a lot of fun, and by the amount of empty tankards and plates on the table, they also seem to have drunk and eaten quite a bit, and they seem to be playing a game. After he loiters for a bit, these guys just turn. They're really friendly, seem like lots of fun, and they just say, hi, how's it going? And Malin says, what's the game? You seem to be having a good time. And the guys say, yeah. They tell their little backstory, and apparently they've just cleared out a goblin town, and they're just spending their treasure. They've been here for a few days, they've nothing but eat, drunk, sleep and played games, and doubtless when their money runs out, go off, find more treasure, come back and do the same. Malin wants to know what's the game. It looks like fun. It's got paper, parchment, quills, inks and little wooden figurines. And the game, they say, is called Cities and Citizens, or C&C, and it's a game where people seek gold and fortune by battling creatures called traffic in their attempt to explore mysterious places called offices. And these places are infested with creatures called bosses and clients who hoard the treasure. You have to fight them to get it off them. Wow, that's interesting, Malin says. That sounds fun. These strange worlds. Yeah, they sound good on a game, but I'm glad I live in the real world. Yeah. He loiters on. These 4 guys, by the way, do also live in the real world. They have their own YouTube channel, and they play D&D. There's something about them, they're very different from my style, very chaotic, lots more larking around than actual adventures. But there was something about them that when I saw them made me feel really nostalgic. Not Netflix's recreated nostalgia of Stranger Things, but the genuine 1981 nostalgia. If you remember E.T., where Elliot and his friends are playing D&D at the beginning of that, also happens that this module is also published in 1981. That kind of nostalgia. So that's my shout out to them. Donard and Ben, check out these guys. These are 4 adventurers, and their names are, there's a thief here, his name's Stuart. There's a big fighter here with a large sword, big guy, his name's Chris. This guy here, bit smaller, but more armour, has got a battle axe, he's called Angel. And here's a dwarf called Coram. These guys, they've all just arrived, they aren't together. They've just been here for a few days, scouted out the area. And, well, when you're somewhere new and you see the same faces time again, eventually you just say hello and end up together. And that's just what they're doing. They're not part of a party, they're just 4 individuals looking to go out in the world, and these potentially may be retainers for us. They are actually being nominated by some of my subscribers. Stuart chose his thief character from this page here, where you are given a list of potential NPCs, and I chose the other 3 from that same list. They all have personality types. We'll probably get to know them. I can't see myself taking all of them again when I remember back to the massive party at the end of the Eye of Traldor, but I'll probably pick them up one by one, probably in the order that they signed up for this madness. Liz sees a couple of interesting looking people in this corner. They're dressed, from her point of view, very exotically. They have bright colours and they wear turbans, and they're very dark skinned. 2 young men, good looking with fine angular features. And this is where we're going to learn a bit more about Liz, how she's a bit naive and deluded, why that might be a liability. Liz is like one of those people who lives in Smallville and dreams of going to the big city. She has rehearsed this over and over in her head 100 times. She always imagines herself going to social events, parties, things like that, knows just what to say to everybody, and everybody is charmed by her. So if that happens in her dreams, then there's no reason why it shouldn't happen in reality. Well, from her point of view. These people, she believes, come from a country called Yalarim, which is a hot desert country filled with oases and red sandstone mountains and ancient cities. Liz knows very little about this place. The only time anything from Yalarim would have been seen in Threshold was when it would have come through in the merchants' caravans, and that was rarely, because Threshold is quite far north, and by the time the caravans got to the town, all the good stuff had already gone. So she may have sometimes seen exotic materials like silk or spices, but she goes up confident that the kind of conversations she has in her head will work in real life. So she asks one of the guys, "Can I ask you a question? Are your clothes, is that silk?" The men look at her a bit confused because, firstly, from their point of view, it's a really boring question. They have no interest in really what their clothes are made of. And also they find it quaint because it's known that Karameikos, from their point of view, is a bit backward. And here is a local who seems, well, quite provincial. And they say, well, yes, and they invite Liz to sit because she has the advantage of being good looking. Liz takes a seat. Well, there's not really much to say. Sylvia handed her wine and she's a bit adrift. So she just saunters over, stands beside Liz and says, unassumingly, "Can I join you?" And the two men look up, they see that she's an elf, and they immediately start speaking to her in Elvish, and she starts speaking back. She takes a chair, and they have a good old conversation. And that leaves Liz out of it, and she is really quite put out. If you see this from the outside, you might think, okay, here's a pretty young woman talking to two handsome young men. Another one comes along, and their attention is diverted to her, and she's ignored. And you might think it's obviously why she's jealous, but that's not the case. For all Liz's daydreams of living the big life and charming everybody when she goes to Specularum, she's never once thought about how she appears to other people. The reality is, she's unaccomplished, she doesn't speak any languages, she doesn't know much about the arts, she doesn't play a musical instrument, she hasn't travelled. So from the point of view of the people she thinks will be impressed by her, she's really not that impressive. To give her credit, she's right that she does need money to move to Specularum. She had a friend who moved to climb that greasy pole up the social ladder, and that friend took a job as a barmaid, and 2 years later, she's still a barmaid. And what's more, as I said, Liz comes from Threshold in the far north, so to the sophisticated people of Specularum, she's going to speak with a rather thick regional accent, which probably is the way their servants speak. But Sylvia is a kindly person, and she quickly sees that Liz is left out of the conversation, so she turns to these two men and says in the common tongue, "Oh, we've had some adventures. Yes, haven't we, Liz? You know, we just rescued some prisoners." Now this is Sylvia being gracious and kind to Liz because she is a kind, unjealous person. Even though she has a 14 wisdom, this is an unwise thing to do, and it might end up getting them in trouble, because all of a sudden these two men take an interest. This previous provincial person seems to have more going for her, and Liz brightens up because she's now part of the conversation. So they talk about their escapades in the Isle of Traldor, but the problem is they just defeated the plans of the Iron Ring. The Iron Ring are a large organisation that has people everywhere, and they are slavers. You don't go around bragging that you got one over on these people, especially since Yalarim is one of the customers for the slave trade. And it could be, but we don't know, that these two men are in this area because they're making their way to the Black Eagle Barony, or even somewhere in this area to negotiate business. Sylvia and Liz are just telling them they've set free a load of prisoners, which maybe they're here to buy. This was where Sylvia's kindness overrid her wisdom, and Liz's own naivety kick-started the whole thing off. Have I dug a hole for myself with that scenario? Will I have the Iron Ring turn up here? We'll see. Ben and Donald are getting the lowdown off these guys about what's happening in the neighbourhood. Malin can't get any information out of these guys. They're having too much fun. They're drunk. But the interesting thing is, they call themselves as a group the Goblin Bashers, and they ask Malin, what's your party called? And Malin suddenly realises that we don't have a name. And he asks, should parties have names? We don't have one. And he starts panicking over this. What I will do, I'll come back in a minute and we'll roll for rumours. What we are looking at here is a rumour table with 20 rumours, and ties in nicely with the 20-sided dice. Some are marked with an F. These are false. But of course, the players don't know that. And each player is allowed to roll for a rumour. If you roll the same number twice, I'm going to roll again. So let's see. We'll start with Ben. He's talking to this thief. Most of these guys look honest. This big fighter, he's a big honest lunk of a guy. This warrior here with his axe, his name is Angel. Ben has seen his type before because Threshold is, well, it's a logging town, and the way this guy's muscles and hands are, he's either the son of a logger, the grandson of a logger, and clearly that's where he learned his battle axe skills. This guy, Stuart the thief, he's up front and off plain speaking, but his eyes are never really focused on the person he's speaking to. He's always looking around the place. He seems a bit of an opportunist, but extra help is extra help. And this dwarf is old. He's a sort of grey-haired, avuncular type character. He sits there nodding slowly to what everybody says and says, "Ah yeah, I remember that. Kids these days." We'll see what rumour Ben gets off this Stuart thief, and he rolls a 2. A powerful magic user will destroy all cave invaders. Okay, what cave? Ben asks. Oh, there's the Caves of Chaos. They're famous, says Stuart. And that rumour is actually a false one. Either this guy doesn't know it's false, or that's just kind of his mischievous way. Maybe he checks people out by feeding them lies to see what they will believe and what they won't believe. Ben is interested in the caves. In fact, because he's been here before, he says, "Wow, those Caves of Chaos still here?" And this thief says, "Yeah, well, apparently. And there's a magic user in them." Donard is going to speak to this dwarf. And of course, Donard has a 4 charisma, so he just walks up to him and says, "You any news?" And the dwarf says, "Oh, it's just more news about those Caves of Chaos that Stuart was talking about. You can't trust them. Oh, apparently all the cave entrances are trapped. So there's a magic user in these caves and they're trapped. They sound pretty dangerous. That is also a false rumour. Maybe he was fed it by this thief." Malin is talking to these guys. Now, it'll take all 4 of them to answer one question. They're quite chaotic. Not chaotic as in evil, but just larking around the place. But they are honest folk. I'm going to put a link to their YouTube stuff in my description below. And that's an 11. And they say, "Beware of treachery within the party." And they say it in a very dramatic way, with a lot of "OR" pirate voices, which they put on for fun. "Beware treachery, ha." It's hard to take them seriously, but that actually is a true rumour. Perhaps there is somebody in the keep itself who isn't to be trusted. Now Liz and Sylvia are getting on famously with these two, telling their stories of the previous adventure, even though they really have no idea who they're talking to. But let's see if Sylvia gets any rumours, and that's a 7. "If you get lost, beware the eater of men." Right, well that's a bit enigmatic, but these guys are from a foreign country. They speak in sort of lyrical, poetic terms. And what does this one say to Liz? And that's a 4. An ogre sometimes helps the cave dwellers. Right, so he goes on yet again about these Caves of Chaos. And they've heard there's an ogre in there who actually might be friendly. Okay, well that's good to know if a bit enigmatic. I didn't roll very high. It doesn't really matter if you roll a low number or a high number. The rumours are all of equal value. We've got our drinks, so we might as well all go back to our own table and discuss what to do next. Well, we're going to spend the evening eating and drinking here, retire to our beds, get up in the next morning and set off on our adventures. We're going to make an offer to Stu-Rat. He's staying in the same tavern, but he's living in the communal room. So we might see him first thing in the morning. And our offer is, does he want to come along? And we'll do some reaction rolls then and see what kind of terms he sets. He's a bit of a shifty character, but he looks like he might be handy with a bow and a dagger. He really doesn't seem to be the kind of person who will put himself into harm's way. And that is this session over with. No dice rolling for adventuring, but the keep on the Borderlands is set up in such a way that you really do have to embed yourself into it as a fantasy world, because there is really no other driving impetus apart from that. And I'm not very good at improvisation, but I'm going to try my best to make that happen, just so I get the most out of this. Until next time, I'll see you then.